I'm Elise, 28 years old, a nurse from Michigan whose life changed forever 3 years ago. I married James Anderson thinking I'd found my forever person and a loving family. How wrong I was. The day his mother Margaret kicked me out while I was 5 months pregnant still haunts me. Standing in the rain, clutching my belly as she screamed I was a fraud. But sometimes life has a way of revealing the truth when you least expect it. Before I tell you how my mother-in-law's cruelty backfired in ways no one saw coming, comment where you're watching from and subscribe if you've ever dealt with toxic in-laws. My story begins at Detroit Memorial Hospital, where I worked as a dedicated nurse in the intensive care unit. I loved my job, the fast pace, the meaningful connections with patients, and the incredible team I worked with. My life was busy, but fulfilling, focused on building my career after graduating with honors from nursing school. I met James Anderson at my college roommate's wedding. He was the best man, tall, with warm brown eyes and an infectious laugh that drew me to him immediately. When he asked me to dance, I felt butterflies I hadn't experienced in years. James was charming, intelligent, and attentive, an architect from a prominent family who designed luxury homes around the Great Lakes. Our connection was instant and powerful. We spent the entire reception talking, and he asked for my number before the night ended. The next day he called and invited me to dinner. Within weeks, we were seeing each other exclusively, spending every free moment together. I fell hard and fast for James, captivated by his ambition, creativity, and the tender way he treated me. "I've never felt this way about anyone," he told me 3 months into our relationship as we walked along Lake Michigan at sunset. "You're different, Elise. Special." What I didn't fully grasp then was how important James's family was to him, particularly his mother. He spoke about them often. His father Thomas, a successful business owner, his sister Sarah, and especially his mother Margaret, who he described as the backbone of the family. The way he talked about her with such reverence should have been my first warning. 6 months into our relationship, James invited me to meet his family at their lakeside estate. I was nervous but excited, spending hours choosing the perfect outfit and bringing an expensive bottle of wine and homemade pastries as gifts. The Anderson family home was intimidating, a sprawling mansion with manicured grounds overlooking the water. James squeezed my hand reassuringly as we walked up the long driveway. "They're going to love you," he promised. Margaret Anderson opened the door before we could knock. She was elegantly dressed, her silver-streaked dark hair perfectly styled, her smile not quite reaching her eyes as she assessed me. "So, this is the nurse we've been hearing so much about," she said, the slight emphasis on nurse, making it sound less like a profession and more like a deficiency. Thomas was warmer, giving me a genuine handshake, while Sarah, James's younger sister, offered a friendly smile. But throughout the dinner, I noticed how Margaret subtly dominated the conversation, frequently referencing family connections, exclusive events, and shared memories that excluded me entirely. When I mentioned growing up in a small town with my single mother, Margaret's eyebrows rose slightly. "How quaint," she said before quickly changing the subject to the summer house they'd just purchased in Martha's Vineyard. Later that night, I expressed my concerns to James as we drove home. "Did I say something wrong? Your mother seemed uncomfortable with me." James laughed, kissing my hand. "Mom's just protective. She's used to the girls from our social circle. Give her time, babe. She'll warm up to you when she sees how happy you make me." I wanted to believe him, so I dismissed the knot in my stomach. Over the next few months, I made countless efforts to connect with Margaret, bringing thoughtful gifts, offering to help with her charity committee, asking about her interests. Each attempt was met with polite but frigid dismissal. When James proposed after a year of dating, presenting me with a stunning emerald-cut diamond ring on a bridge overlooking the city lights, I was ecstatic. But my joy was tempered when we announced our engagement at the mandatory Sunday dinner at the Anderson home. "Engaged so soon?" Margaret's voice was tight as she examined my ring. "I suppose congratulations are in order, though I had hoped James might settle down after making partner at the firm." James didn't notice the bar beaming with happiness as his father clapped him on the back and Sarah hugged me warmly. I tried to focus on their positive reactions rather than the cold calculation in Margaret's eyes. The wedding planning quickly became a battleground. Margaret insisted on handling everything from the venue to the guest list, often scheduling meetings when she knew I would be working hospital shifts. "Mom's been planning my wedding since I was born." James chuckled when I expressed frustration. "It makes her happy to be involved. What does it matter who picks the flowers or the napkin colors? It mattered because each decision Margaret made seemed designed to erase my presence from my own wedding. The traditional Catholic ceremony she insisted upon despite my Protestant upbringing. The country club venue that none of my family could afford to stay near. The guest list that included 200 of their associates and only 30 of my friends and relatives. James always sided with his mother, making me feel unreasonable for wanting any input. "Mom knows best about these things," became his mantra. She moves in these circles. Our wedding day was beautiful on the surface, picture perfect for the society pages Margaret coveted. But underneath ran currents of tension. Margaret wore cream nearly matching my white dress and interrupted our first dance to remind the band about the precise timing of the evening's schedule. She gave a toast that spoke entirely about James's childhood and future prospects, mentioning me only as the woman who will support him on his journey. My own mother, a hard-working teacher who had sacrificed everything to raise me alone after my father left, was seated at a back table far from the main family. I saw the hurt in her eyes, though she never complained. As a wedding gift, Thomas and Margaret gave us a beautiful house not far from their estate. I was touched by their generosity until I discovered the property remained in the family trust, not our names. "Just a formality," James assured me, "for tax purposes." I didn't realize then that this gift was another way for Margaret to maintain control, another string keeping her son tethered to her web. Our first year of marriage had moments of genuine happiness. James and I settled into our new home, decorating rooms and creating routines together. When it was just us, things were wonderful. James was attentive and loving, surprising me with small gifts and planning weekend getaways. I truly believed we were building something special. But Margaret's shadow loomed large over our marriage from the beginning. Sunday dinners at the Anderson estate were mandatory, written in stone. If we tried to miss one for any reason, the repercussions were swift and severe. Cold phone calls, guilt trips, and Margaret dropping by unannounced to find out what was more important than family. These dinners were weekly exercises in subtle humiliation. Margaret would question my career choices, asking when I planned to settle down properly, instead of working those grueling hospital shifts. When I was promoted to charge nurse 6 months after our wedding, an achievement I was immensely proud of, Margaret barely acknowledged it. "How nice," she said dismissively. "Though I always thought nursing was a stepping stone to something else. Surely you don't plan to keep working those hours once you have children." James would squeeze my hand under the table but never contradicted his mother directly. "Mom comes from a different generation," he'd explain later. "In her world, wives of successful men focus on family and charity work." Margaret's interference wasn't limited to Sunday dinners. She had a key to our house, for emergencies, and used it freely. I'd come home from a 12-hour shift to find her rearranging my kitchen cabinets or replacing the curtains I'd chosen with ones she deemed more suitable. "The house is still technically family property," she reminded me frequently. "I'm just helping maintain its value." James saw nothing wrong with his mother's invasions. "She's being helpful," he'd insist. "Mom has amazing taste. We're lucky she cares so much." Sarah, James's younger sister, became an unexpected ally during this time. Unlike her brother, Sarah saw through their mother's manipulations. Over lunch one day while James was at work, she confided in me. "Margaret has always been like this." Sarah told me, her voice low despite us being alone at a cafe far from family haunts. "She micromanaged my college applications, my friendships, even my wardrobe until I moved to Chicago for graduate school. Distance was the only thing that saved my sanity." Sarah warned me that Margaret had driven away James's previous girlfriends through similar tactics. "James has always been her favorite, her golden child. She doesn't think any woman is good enough for him." These warnings were confirmed when I discovered Margaret reading my personal journal during one of her unannounced visits. I had come home early from work feeling unwell, only to find her in our bedroom, my journal open in her hands. "I was just dusting," she claimed, not even having the decency to look embarrassed. "It fell open. I would never intentionally pry." That night, I had my first major fight with James about setting boundaries with his mother. "She invaded my privacy, James. She read my private thoughts. That's not okay under any circumstances." "You're overreacting," he responded, defensive immediately. "Mom wouldn't do that deliberately. She's just concerned about you, about us." "Concerned? She's controlling every aspect of our lives. She barges in whenever she wants, criticizes everything I do, and you never stand up to her." James promised to talk to his mother about respecting our privacy, but I knew as I watched him make the call that he was already watering down my concerns, making it sound like a minor misunderstanding. The next Sunday, Margaret acted as if nothing had happened, and James seemed relieved to pretend the same. I felt increasingly isolated. My friends from the hospital tried to include me in their gatherings, but between my shifting work schedule and James's preference for spending time with his family or his business associates, maintaining those friendships became difficult. My mother lived 3 hours away, and though we spoke regularly, her discomfort with the Andersons made visits strained. After 18 months of marriage, I decided that perhaps having a child of our own would help establish our family as separate from the Andersons. A grandchild might soften Margaret, give her a positive outlet for her controlling tendencies. More importantly, I thought it would strengthen my bond with James, create something that was truly ours. James was enthusiastic about starting a family. We spent 6 beautiful months trying to conceive, reconnecting in a way that reminded me why I'd fallen in love with him. When I finally saw those 2 pink lines on the pregnancy test, I cried with joy. "We're going to be parents," I whispered to James as I showed him the test. The look of wonder and love in his eyes as he placed his hand on my still flat stomach made all the struggles with his family seem worthwhile. "This changes everything," he said, kissing me tenderly. "This is the beginning of our real family." I didn't realize then how prophetic those words would be, though not in the way either of us imagined. I was nearly 8 weeks pregnant when we decided to announce the news to the Anderson family. I'd been experiencing typical first trimester symptoms, morning sickness, fatigue, food aversions, but wanted to wait until our first doctor's appointment to share our joy. That appointment was scheduled for a Tuesday morning. James had promised to take time off work to be there, but the night before, Margaret called with a family emergency regarding some investment properties. Despite my disappointment, I assured James I would be fine going alone. "I'll record everything on my phone," I promised. "You can see our baby as soon as you're done helping your mom." The ultrasound revealed a strong heartbeat and a perfectly developing baby. The technician printed photos for me to take home, and I couldn't wait to show James that evening. When I arrived at the Anderson estate for our announcement dinner, however, I discovered Margaret had invited several extended family members and close friends, turning our intimate pregnancy announcement into a social event. "James mentioned you had some news," she said innocently when I questioned her about the extra guests. "I thought it would be nice to have everyone here." I swallowed my frustration, determined not to let her ruin this special moment. After dinner, James and I stood together, hands clasped, as he proudly announced we were expecting. The reaction was mostly positive. Thomas looked genuinely pleased. Sarah rushed to hug me, and several guests offered congratulations. But Margaret's response chilled the room. "Pregnant?" she said, her voice sharp with disbelief. "Already? How? Convenient." Her eyes narrowed as she looked at me. "I assume you've confirmed the paternity." The room fell silent. James's face flushed with embarrassment and anger. "Mother, of course it's mine. How could you even suggest otherwise?" Margaret raised her hands in mock surrender. "I'm only thinking of you, darling. It's just so sudden, and with Elise's demanding career, one has to wonder about her associations at that hospital." I felt physically ill and not from morning sickness. How dare she imply I had been unfaithful? James defended me in the moment, but later downplayed his mother's vicious insinuation. "She's just shocked," he said as we drove home. "She didn't mean it the way it sounded. Mom's old-fashioned about these things. She probably thought we'd wait longer before starting a family." But that night marked the beginning of Margaret's campaign against my pregnancy. Over the following weeks, she spread doubts among family members, questioning everything from the timing to my ability to be a good mother while working as a nurse. "I'm just concerned about the stress of her job on the baby," I overheard her telling James's aunt at a family gathering. "All those germs at the hospital, the long hours on her feet. And you know how these career women are. They often find motherhood more challenging than they expected." My morning sickness worsened, lasting throughout the day and causing weight loss instead of gain in my first trimester. Rather than offering support, Margaret suggested I was being dramatic for attention and told James that pregnant women in her family never experienced such severe symptoms. "Maybe it's psychosomatic," she suggested within my hearing. Some women create physical symptoms when they're uncertain about motherhood. At 14 weeks, I experienced a frightening episode of spotting and cramping that sent me to the emergency room. The doctor diagnosed a threatened miscarriage, prescribing bed rest for a week and reduced activity thereafter. James stayed with me at the hospital, but left once I was stable, explaining that his mother was beside herself with worry and needed his reassurance. Later, Sarah confided that Margaret had told everyone I was exaggerating the complication to manipulate James into paying more attention to me. She even suggested you might not have been pregnant at all, that this was your way of covering up a lie, Sarah admitted reluctantly. As my pregnancy progressed, James spent more and more time at his parents' home discussing family business that somehow never included me. He began coming home late, offering vague explanations about meetings or helping his father with investment strategies. One afternoon, while searching for a missing insurance document, I discovered papers in James's home office indicating he had recently updated his will. The changes removed me as primary beneficiary of his personal assets, instead placing them in a family trust controlled by his parents should anything happen to him. The document made only a small provision for any potential offspring pending verification. Verification. The word echoed Margaret's earlier insinuation about paternity. When I confronted James about the will, he became defensive and evasive. "It's just legal protection, Elise. My family has significant assets to consider. Once the baby is born, we'll update everything." "But why didn't you discuss this with me? We're married, James. These decisions should be made together." "Mom and Dad suggested it was prudent given our circumstances," he replied, avoiding my eyes. "Their attorney advised this approach." Around this time, Sarah revealed something that made the puzzle pieces fall into place. Over coffee at my house while James was at work, she hesitantly explained that Margaret had always intended for James to marry Amelia Bradford, his high school girlfriend from another wealthy family. "They dated through college until James broke it off during law school," Sarah explained. "Mom was furious. She'd practically planned their wedding already. Amelia was from the right background, understood the right social obligations. The revelation wasn't just about class prejudice." Sarah lowered her voice further, though we were alone. "I think Mom's still in contact with Amelia. I saw them having lunch together last month at the country club. They stopped talking when they noticed me." This information made me look more closely at my husband's behavior. James had become increasingly critical of me, echoing his mother's concerns almost verbatim. He questioned my diet, my exercise habits, even my prenatal vitamin brand, always prefacing his criticisms with "Mom thinks" or "Mom says." At 18 weeks pregnant, I overheard a phone conversation between James and his mother that confirmed my worst fears. I had come home early from a doctor's appointment, another one James had missed, and heard his voice from his office. "I understand your concerns, Mom," he was saying, his voice low. "The timing is suspicious. Yes, she did have that male partner for the Henderson project. I know you're just looking out for me. Of course I want to be certain." My heart felt like it was being crushed in my chest. James, the man I loved, the father of my child, was actually entertaining his mother's vicious lies about my fidelity. In that moment, I realized how deeply Margaret's poison had seeped into our marriage. What I didn't know then was that the worst was yet to come. The day that shattered my world arrived when I was exactly 20 weeks pregnant, halfway through creating the life growing inside me. I had just returned from a prenatal checkup where I'd learned we were having a girl. Despite James missing yet another appointment, I was ecstatic, already imagining a daughter with her father's warm eyes and dimpled smile. I entered our home carrying the ultrasound images, eager to share them with James despite the growing distance between us. Instead of an empty house, I found James and Margaret waiting in the living room, their expressions grave. The atmosphere was thick with tension, like the air before a violent storm. "We need to talk, Elise," James said, his voice colder than I'd ever heard it. There was no warmth in his eyes, no trace of the man who had once looked at me with such love. Margaret sat perfectly poised in our armchair, my armchair, a manila folder on her lap and a triumphant gleam in her eyes. She wore the expression of someone who had finally trapped their prey after a long hunt. "We know what you've been doing," she said, opening the folder with manicured fingers. "Did you really think you could fool a family like ours?" Inside the folder were photographs me having lunch with my male colleague Paul, discussing a patient case meeting my prenatal yoga instructor Mark in a cafe to arrange private sessions, hugging my cousin David who had visited from out of town. Each innocent interaction presented as evidence of infidelity. "You've been having us followed," I asked, my voice barely a whisper as the betrayal cut through me. "I hired someone to protect my son's interests," Margaret replied smoothly. "And it's a good thing I did. Look at the dates, James, all during the time she claims to have conceived." James wouldn't meet my eyes. "How could you, Elise? I trusted you." "These are completely innocent. Paul is a colleague. We were discussing a patient. Mark is my yoga instructor, and David is my cousin, for God's sake." My hands trembled as I tried to show him the ultrasound photos. "Look, James, our daughter. I just found out today. She's perfect." Margaret snatched the images before James could take them. "More manipulation," she hissed. "For all we know, this pregnancy is completely fabricated. Women like you will do anything to secure their position." "Women like me," I repeated, tears streaming down my face. "Gold diggers," Margaret said bluntly. "Do you think we don't know about your mother's financial problems? How convenient that you trapped my son just as her medical bills were mounting." The cruelty took my breath away. My mother had been diagnosed with early-stage breast cancer the year before, but her treatment had been fully covered by insurance. I had never asked James for money for my family. "James, please," I begged. "You know me. You know I would never—" "I want a divorce," he interrupted, still looking at the floor rather than at me. "And a paternity test if there is a baby." "If," I gasped instinctively, placing a protective hand over my visibly rounded belly. "I'm 20 weeks pregnant with your child." Margaret stood, then her full height intimidating as she looked down at me. "We need you to leave, today. The house belongs to the family trust, as you've always known." "You can't be serious," I whispered. "Where am I supposed to go?" "That's hardly our concern," Margaret replied. "You should have thought of that before you deceived my son." I turned to James, desperate for some sign of the man I'd married. "Are you really going to let her do this? Throw out your pregnant wife based on these ridiculous accusations?" Finally, he looked at me, and the emptiness in his eyes told me everything. Margaret had won. Whatever love he'd felt for me had been systematically destroyed by his mother's manipulations. "I'll have the locks changed tomorrow," he said flatly. "Take what you need for tonight. The rest can be arranged through attorneys." I stood frozen, unable to comprehend how quickly my life was disintegrating. As the reality sank in, I began to gather some essentials: clothes, toiletries, important documents, my movements mechanical while my mind screamed in protest. As I headed for the door, suitcase and purse in hand, Margaret delivered her final devastating blow. "We don't need your child," she sneered, following me to the entryway. "You'll never give my son a baby. You lied about your pregnancy to get my son's property." The venom in her voice made me physically recoil. Standing on the porch steps, the door half closed between us, I saw the depth of her hatred. "You're nothing," she continued. "A nobody from nowhere trying to claw your way into a family that will never accept you. James will have real children with a woman worthy of the Anderson name." The door slammed shut. I stood outside in the early evening drizzle, one hand on my belly, the other clutching my suitcase, utterly alone and homeless at 5 months pregnant. Margaret's cruel words echoed in my mind as tears mixed with raindrops on my face. I had no car. We shared James's vehicles, and mine had been sold months earlier. My phone was nearly dead. With shaking hands, I called the only person I could think of who might help: Sarah. 20 minutes later, headlights cut through the rain as Sarah's car pulled into the driveway. She rushed out, umbrella forgotten, as she took in my drenched appearance and tear-stained face. "Oh my God, Elise, what happened?" I could barely form words through my sobs. They kicked me out. James wants a divorce. Margaret showed him pictures, accused me of cheating. They don't believe the baby is his." Sarah's face drained of color. "Get in the car. You're coming with me." As she helped me into the passenger seat, the front door opened. Sarah turned to see her brother and mother watching from the doorway. "What do you think you're doing?" Margaret called out. Sarah straightened to her full height, rain soaking her blouse. "The right thing, something this family seems to have forgotten how to do." "You're choosing her over your own blood." Margaret's voice was incredulous. I'm choosing humanity over cruelty, Sarah replied, getting into the driver's seat. And that baby is Anderson blood too, whether you want to admit it or not. As we drove away, the emotional shock gave way to physical distress. Sharp pains stabbed through my abdomen and I felt a wetness that had nothing to do with the rain. "Sarah," I gasped. "Something's wrong. The baby." She immediately changed course toward the hospital, her face tight with worry as she called ahead to the emergency department. By the time we arrived, the cramping was constant, and I was terrified of losing the only family I had left. The next few hours passed in a blur of medical interventions. The diagnosis, placental abruption, likely triggered by extreme stress. The doctor's face was grave as he explained the condition could be life-threatening for both me and my baby, if not managed properly. "Complete bed rest," he ordered. "No exceptions. Your blood pressure is dangerously high, and we need to monitor you for at least 48 hours. Sarah never left my side, handling everything from insurance forms to calling my supervisor at the hospital to arrange medical leave. She brought me clean clothes and toiletries, her face grim when she returned from gathering my belongings from her brother's house. "James wasn't there," she told me. "But Mom was. She tried to prevent me from taking your things, saying they might be evidence." Sarah's disgust was evident. I told her I'd call the police and report her for elder abuse next time she pressured Dad into changing his medication dosage if she didn't back off. On my second day in the hospital, a courier delivered divorce papers to my room. The audacity of sending them while I was hospitalized fighting to save our baby left me speechless. The documents included demands for a paternity test and suggested I had committed fraud by falsely claiming pregnancy to secure financial advantages. The next visitor was even more unwelcome. Margaret appeared in my doorway while Sarah was out getting food, her expensive perfume filling the small hospital room. "I thought you should know James is having all the locks changed today," she said without preamble. "And we expect those papers signed promptly. Our attorney has advised us that delaying would be unwise." "Get out," I whispered, the monitors beside me beeping faster as my heart rate increased. "You've done enough damage." Margaret's smile was cold. "Damage? I'm protecting my son from a fortune hunter. You're not the first to try this scheme, though. I'll admit you were more convincing than most." She glanced dismissively at my belly. "If there even is a baby, it certainly isn't James's." Before she could continue, a nurse entered immediately, noting my distressed vitals. "You need to leave," she told Margaret firmly. "My patient requires rest." "I'm family," Margaret protested. "Not according to her chart," the nurse replied. "And as her medical proxy, Sarah Anderson has left specific instructions about visitors." As the nurse escorted Margaret out, I closed my eyes, tears streaming down my face. How had I not seen the true nature of the family I'd married into? How could James believe such horrible lies about me? And most importantly, how would I protect my daughter from these people who had already rejected her? After being discharged from the hospital, I faced the daunting reality of rebuilding my life from scratch. Sarah offered her one-bedroom apartment as temporary housing, converting her living room into a makeshift bedroom for me. Her kindness was the only light in my darkest hour. "I'm so sorry," she said repeatedly. "I should have warned you more clearly about my mother. I've seen her manipulate people before, but never this destructively." Sarah's decision to help me came at a significant cost. Margaret retaliated by freezing Sarah's access to family funds and spreading rumors within their social circle that Sarah had psychological issues, causing her to turn against the family. "It doesn't matter," Sarah assured me when I expressed guilt. "I've been saving to break away from their control for years. This just accelerates my timeline." With Sarah's help, I contacted my older sister Emma in Chicago. We had grown distant after a disagreement years earlier, but when I explained my situation, she responded with immediate compassion. "Come stay with me," she offered. "I have a spare room and you shouldn't be alone right now." The generosity of both these women brought me to tears. I had spent so long isolated within the Anderson family sphere that I'd forgotten the power of genuine support. My medical situation remained precarious. The placental abruption had stabilized, but my blood pressure continued to fluctuate dangerously. My doctor ordered complete bed rest for the remainder of the pregnancy and warned that premature delivery was a significant risk. "Every day we keep that baby inside is critical for her development," he explained. "Your job now is to stay calm and horizontal as much as possible." Taking medical leave from work created immediate financial strain. Although I had some savings, they wouldn't last long with mounting medical bills and legal fees. The hospital's HR department was understanding arranging for short-term disability benefits, but they covered only a portion of my salary. Sarah connected me with attorney Michael Harris, a former classmate who specialized in family law. After hearing my story, he offered to take my case pro bono. "What's happening to you is unconscionable," Michael said during our first meeting in Sarah's apartment. "Using pregnancy complications as leverage in divorce proceedings crosses ethical and possibly legal lines." Michael's first action was filing for emergency spousal support and blocking the Andersons' attempt to expedite the divorce while I was medically vulnerable. He also secured a court order allowing me to retrieve all my personal belongings from the house. "They can't just throw a pregnant woman onto the street and wash their hands of responsibility," he assured me. Regardless of their nasty insinuations, James has financial obligations to his spouse. As news of my situation spread among my hospital colleagues, an unexpected support network formed around me. Nurses organized meal deliveries. An obstetrician colleague offered free prenatal care to supplement my insurance coverage. Neighbors in Sarah's building helped with errands and transportation to medical appointments. While Sarah was helping me organize my financial documents for the court case, she discovered something troubling in a folder James had once asked me to store. "Elise, look at this," she said, pulling out a medical report dated 3 years before I met James. "It's from the family's private physician." The document detailed a comprehensive fertility workup for James, diagnosing him with a condition called oligospermia, a low sperm count caused by a genetic disorder called Klinefelter syndrome. "This can't be right," I whispered, remembering our 6 months of trying to conceive. "We didn't have any fertility treatments. The pregnancy happened naturally." Sarah's expression was grim. "According to this, that would be nearly impossible. James's condition makes natural conception extremely unlikely without medical intervention." The revelation sent me back to the hospital with another spike in blood pressure. There, my obstetrician confirmed what the report suggested. The genetic condition mentioned would indeed cause significant fertility issues. "Men with Klinefelter syndrome typically have very low sperm counts," the doctor explained. "Natural conception isn't impossible, but it's rare without assistance." When I returned to Sarah's apartment, more pieces fell into place. She had found additional documents in James's medical file indicating he had undergone sperm banking before our marriage, a standard recommendation for men with his condition. "Mom must have known," Sarah said, her voice hollow with realization. "This explains why she was so fixated on Amelia as James's wife." Further investigation revealed that Amelia's family had a history of the same genetic condition. "It would have been easier to hide," Sarah explained. "If James had fertility issues with Amelia, no one would question it because of her family history. They could have used donors or other treatments without raising suspicions." The most shocking discovery came when my genetic counselor consulting on the case due to the inherited nature of James's condition recognized the family name. "The Andersons have been patients at our clinic for generations," she confirmed after I signed a release. "This condition has appeared repeatedly in the male line. They're well aware of the fertility implications." Armed with this information, Michael adjusted our legal strategy. "If Margaret knew about James's condition but encouraged him to accuse you of infidelity, that's malicious intent," he explained. "And if James concealed his medical condition from you before marriage, that's fraudulent misrepresentation." As my pregnancy progressed under careful monitoring, I moved into a small apartment that Emma helped me find and furnish. Though tiny and far from the luxury I'd grown accustomed to, it represented something priceless: independence. I focused all my energy on staying healthy for my daughter, following medical advice religiously, and trying to manage the stress of the ongoing legal battle. The Andersons had hired an aggressive firm known for scorched earth divorce tactics, but Michael remained confident. "They're overplaying their hand," he said after a particularly nasty filing accused me of fabricating medical emergencies. "Judges don't look kindly on parties who target pregnant women, especially with documented health complications." Through Sarah, I learned that James had reconnected with Amelia within weeks of our separation, likely an arrangement orchestrated by Margaret. The speed of their reunion suggested the relationship had been rekindled even before I was expelled from our home. "He's not thinking clearly," Sarah said sadly. "Mom has him completely under her thumb again." As my due date approached, another Anderson family member unexpectedly reached out. James's cousin Bethany, who had experienced similar treatment from Margaret years earlier when she'd married beneath her station. "Margaret destroyed my marriage too," Bethany confided. "She told my husband I was only with him for his connection to the family money, planted evidence of affairs that never happened." Sound familiar? Bethany's validation of my experience was healing in ways I hadn't anticipated. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't alone. Margaret had a documented history of destroying relationships she disapproved of. At 36 weeks pregnant after another hospitalization for preeclampsia labor was induced for the safety of both me and the baby. Sarah and Emma stood by me through 22 grueling hours, providing the support that should have come from my husband. When my daughter finally arrived, tiny but perfect at 5 pounds 3 ounces, the rush of love was overwhelming. Looking into her face, I saw echoes of James, but also strength that was entirely her own. I named her Sophia Grace, meaning wisdom and grace, the qualities I hoped would guide her through life. As I held her in my arms, I made a silent promise. No matter what happened with the Andersons, this child would know she was wanted, loved, and valued for exactly who she was. And I would fight with everything I had to protect her from the toxicity that had poisoned her father's family for generations. 3 weeks after Sophia's birth, I stood in the county courthouse, physically exhausted but spiritually fortified by a determination I never knew I possessed. Michael had arranged for me to have a private entrance to avoid press. The Anderson family's prominence had made our case fodder for local gossip columns. Sarah sat beside me at the plaintiff's table, while Emma stayed home with Sophia. Across the courtroom sat James, flanked by Margaret and 2 stern-faced attorneys. Thomas was noticeably absent. Sarah had mentioned he was increasingly uncomfortable with Margaret's handling of the situation. Margaret exuded smugness as proceedings began, clearly expecting the judge to rule in their favor, as most authority figures in their social circle typically did. When the judge ordered the paternity test results to be read into record, Margaret actually smiled. That smile evaporated as the court clerk announced, "The probability of paternity is 99.9 on 98%. James Anderson is confirmed as the biological father of Sophia Grace Wilder." James visibly paled. Margaret whispered furiously to the attorney, while James stared at me with confusion written across his face. For the first time, I saw a crack in the narrative his mother had constructed. "Your Honor," Michael said, rising, "we'd like to present evidence that the allegations of infidelity were not only false, but maliciously fabricated with full knowledge of their impossibility." He proceeded to introduce James's medical records, including the diagnosis of Klinefelter syndrome and its impact on fertility. A reproductive endocrinologist testified about the extremely low probability of natural conception given James's condition. Yet conception occurred, Michael pointed out. The paternity test confirms it. The most likely explanation is not infidelity, but rather a medical miracle, or perhaps medical intervention that Mr. Anderson has conveniently forgotten. That's when I remembered. Early in our marriage, James had become ill with what we thought was a severe flu, running a high fever for days. His doctor had prescribed medication that required freezing some of his sperm as a precaution, as the treatment could potentially affect fertility. We had done so at a clinic affiliated with the hospital where I worked. The process had been routine, almost forgettable in the context of his illness. The clinic records confirmed it. We had used that stored sample during what I thought was natural conception. The timing of my most fertile days had coincided with the doctor's suggestion to not waste the opportunity, since we'd already gone through the collection process. I had forgotten the technical intervention because it had seemed so minor at the time. No hormonal treatments for me, no formal IVF process, just optimal timing and some assistance. James's face showed dawning recognition as Michael presented these records. You really were pregnant with my baby," he said, his voice barely audible across the courtroom. "I've been saying that for months," I replied evenly. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, turned her attention to Margaret. "Mrs. Anderson, did you have knowledge of your son's medical condition when you accused your daughter-in-law of infidelity?" Margaret's composure slipped. "The details of my son's health are private family matters." "That's not what I asked," the judge pressed. "Were you aware that your son's condition made natural conception unlikely when you accused Mrs. Anderson of becoming pregnant through infidelity?" "I was protecting my son." Margaret snapped, her mask of gentility cracking further. She trapped him with this pregnancy. The medical records indicate both parties consented to the fertility procedure, the judge noted, reviewing the documents. There appears to have been no deception on Mrs. Anderson's part. Michael then presented the evidence of Margaret's long-standing interference in the marriage, including testimony from Sarah about Margaret's continued relationship with Amelia throughout my marriage to James. Your Honor, Sarah testified, my mother planned to replace Elise with Amelia from the beginning. She knew about the fertility issues in both families and considered it a suitable match that would keep certain medical realities private. The courtroom fell silent as Sarah detailed Margaret's systematic campaign to isolate me from James, from family support, and eventually from my home. She used the same tactics with other women who married into our family but didn't meet her approval, Sarah concluded, nodding toward Bethany in the gallery. When James was called to testify, he seemed shell-shocked. I didn't remember the fertility procedure, he admitted. It was such a minor thing during my illness. Mother told me it was impossible the baby could be mine, and I believed her. Did you verify this with your doctor? The judge asked. No, James admitted, looking ashamed. Mother said she had consulted with specialists who confirmed it. As the hearing continued, more family members stepped forward with their own experiences of Margaret's manipulations. Cousins who had been disowned for marrying inappropriately, relatives whose inheritances had been threatened when they challenged Margaret's authority. The most damning testimony came from Thomas Anderson, who arrived mid-proceedings walking with a cane and looking years older than his age. For 50 years I've allowed my wife to control our family in ways that I knew were wrong, he said, his voice trembling. I convinced myself it was for the best, that she knew better than I did what was right for our children. I was a coward. He turned to me, tears in his eyes. I'm sorry, Elise. I should have stopped this. I knew about James's condition. I knew you couldn't have deceived him the way Margaret claimed, but I stayed silent as I always have. By the time all evidence had been presented, the narrative had completely shifted. The judge's ruling was unequivocal. The court finds no grounds for the petitioner's claims of fraud or infidelity. On the contrary, the evidence suggests a disturbing pattern of interference and manipulation by Margaret Anderson. She turned to James. Mr. Anderson, you have been complicit in the mistreatment of your wife during an extremely vulnerable time. The court takes a very dim view of such behavior. The judge awarded me primary physical custody of Sophia, generous child support, and a substantial portion of James's personal assets as part of the divorce settlement. Additionally, she ordered a psychiatric evaluation for Margaret, whose behavior she described as potentially indicative of a personality disorder requiring professional intervention. As we prepared to leave the courtroom, James approached me tentatively. Can I see her, Sophia? The raw emotion in his voice touched something I thought had died months ago. You're her father, I replied simply. But there will be conditions, and a lot of repair work needed. Margaret tried to intervene, pulling at James's arm. This isn't over, she hissed at me. For the first time, James pulled away from his mother's grasp. Yes, it is, Mother. You lied to me. You kept me from my child. You destroyed my marriage with your manipulations. As Margaret sputtered protests, the judge called for order. Mrs. Anderson, I've ordered a psychological evaluation for a reason. Your behavior suggests a concerning disconnect from reality and appropriate boundaries. I strongly recommend you comply voluntarily. Walking out of the courthouse that day, I felt neither triumph nor vindication. Only relief that the truth had finally emerged, and hope that my daughter would now be protected from the toxic dynamics that had nearly destroyed me. The Anderson family's facade of perfection had cracked irreparably, and in those cracks the possibility of something healthier might eventually grow. The 3 years since that courtroom confrontation have been a journey of healing growth and unexpected blessings. After the divorce was finalized, I used part of the settlement to purchase a modest but comfortable 3-bedroom home near Emma in Chicago. The warm yellow house with its small garden became a sanctuary where Sophia and I could build our new life together. Returning to nursing proved more challenging than I'd anticipated. The stress of the pregnancy and legal battle had taken a physical toll, leaving me with chronic hypertension that made the demanding hours of hospital work difficult to manage. Instead, I found a position at a pediatric clinic with family-friendly hours that allowed me to prioritize Sophia while still using my medical skills. You're different now, Emma observed 6 months after we'd settled in Chicago. Stronger. You don't second-guess yourself the way you used to. She was right. The crucible of Margaret's cruelty had burned away my need for external validation. I had survived the worst kind of betrayal and emerged intact with a beautiful daughter as testament to my resilience. James began therapy shortly after the court case, a condition I'd insisted upon before allowing him unsupervised visits with Sophia. His journey to extricate himself from his mother's influence has been difficult, but genuine. During one of our co-parenting conversations, he made an admission that surprised me with its self-awareness. "I never developed a real identity separate from what my mother wanted me to be," he confessed. "I'm trying to figure out who I actually am now at 34. It's like being an adolescent all over again, but with a lot more baggage." We established a careful co-parenting relationship with James, traveling to Chicago twice monthly for visits with Sophia. I set firm boundaries. No overnight visits until she was older, no bringing Sophia anywhere near Margaret, and regular updates on his therapeutic progress. Sarah became Sophia's godmother and a constant presence in our lives. She moved to Chicago not long after we did, taking a position at a university there, and finally achieving the independence from her family she had long desired. "Being Sophia's godmother is the best role I've ever had," she told me on my daughter's first birthday. "She's going to grow up so different from us, knowing she's loved unconditionally, not for what she achieves or who she impresses." Margaret continued her attempts to insert herself into Sophia's life, sending extravagant gifts and demanding photos. When these were returned unopened, she escalated to showing up unannounced at my workplace. A restraining order became necessary, limiting her contact to supervised settings only if deemed in Sophia's best interest, which, given Margaret's ongoing refusal to acknowledge her behavior, I determined it was not. The psychological evaluation ordered by the court diagnosed Margaret with narcissistic personality disorder. Though she initially rejected the diagnosis as nonsense from incompetent doctors, the family ultimately insisted she seek treatment after several public incidents revealed the extent of her instability. Thomas Anderson, James's father, surprised me with a heartfelt letter 6 months after the court case. "I failed my son by allowing Margaret's toxic influence to dominate our family," he wrote. "I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope someday to know my granddaughter." After careful consideration and several private meetings with Thomas, I eventually allowed him supervised visits with Sophia. Unlike Margaret, Thomas showed genuine remorse and a willingness to respect my boundaries. Watching him tenderly read to Sophia during these visits, I saw a man trying to redeem himself by being the grandfather he should have been from the beginning. The journey toward healing wasn't linear. I experienced panic attacks, insomnia, and periods of profound sadness as I processed the trauma of my marriage. A support group for parents who had experienced family estrangement became a lifeline, offering understanding that even well-meaning friends couldn't provide. "Toxic family dynamics create wounds that look invisible but cut bone deep," explained Diane, our group facilitator. "Acknowledging those wounds is the first step toward healing them." Through the group, I met Daniel, a pediatrician and single father whose wife had died shortly after their son was born. His gentle presence and authentic kindness were so different from what I had experienced with James. We began as friends, sharing parenting tips and occasional family outings with our children. "You know what I noticed first about you?" Daniel told me after we'd been dating for 6 months. "The way you really listen to Sophia, even when she's just babbling about butterflies or telling the same story for the 10th time. You give her your full attention. That's rare and beautiful." When Sophia turned 1, we celebrated with a small garden party. James attended, as did Sarah, Emma, and a few close friends. Watching my daughter giggle as she smashed cake between her tiny fingers, I felt a profound sense of peace. This was what family should be, people who genuinely cared for each other, supporting one another without manipulation or conditions. James continued his therapy, gradually untangling himself from Margaret's web of control. He and Amelia had briefly reunited after our divorce, but the relationship collapsed once he began questioning the patterns that had shaped his life. "I realized I was dating her for the same reason I'd done everything else, to please my mother," he admitted during one of our co-parenting discussions. "I'm trying to make choices based on what I actually want now. It's harder than I expected." Margaret's influence over the extended Anderson family waned as more relatives recognized the destructive patterns she had established. Family gatherings became divided between those still under her sway and those who had broken free, a painful schism, but perhaps a necessary one for healing to begin. On Sophia's second birthday, I received an unexpected call from Bethany James's cousin, who had shared her own experience of Margaret's interference. "I thought you should know," she said without preamble. "Margaret's been hospitalized. She had some kind of breakdown at a charity event accusing random people of conspiring against her. They're adjusting her medication, but Thomas is finally considering a long-term care facility." The news brought complicated emotions. I felt no joy in Margaret's suffering, only sadness for the woman who had allowed her need for control to destroy so many relationships, including with her own son. What a lonely existence to trust no one and need to manipulate everyone. As Sophia has grown, I've watched her develop a personality entirely her own, stubborn and spirited with a belly laugh that fills our home with joy. She has James's analytical mind and creative instincts, but a confidence and emotional intelligence that I like to think come from being raised in an environment of unconditional love. Daniel has become an important part of our lives, his son Max becoming Sophia's best friend and almost brother, as she calls him. We're taking our relationship slowly, mindful of the children's attachment and my own healing journey. But there's something profoundly healing about being with someone who values transparency and emotional honesty above appearances or social status. Last month, James invited me for coffee during one of his visits with Sophia. As we watched our daughter playing in the park nearby, he said something that showed how far he'd come. "You know what I realized in therapy recently? I never actually knew what I wanted in life. Every goal, every ambition was something my mother had planned for me. Even my career. I never wanted to be an architect. I wanted to teach music." "It's not too late," I reminded him. "Sophia would love having a dad who teaches music." He smiled, a genuine expression I rarely saw during our marriage. "I've enrolled in a master's program, starting next fall." As I look back on the past 3 years, I'm struck by how differently things turned out from what I had once envisioned. The perfect marriage, the wealthy family, the prestigious social connections, all of it proved to be an illusion, a gilded cage rather than a dream life. Instead, I found something more valuable: authentic connections, inner strength, and the knowledge that I can trust my own perceptions even when others try to distort them. I learned that true family isn't defined by blood or legal documents, but by who shows up for you in your darkest moments without expectations or conditions. Sophia will grow up knowing this truth from the beginning. She'll understand that her worth isn't tied to achievements or appearances, that healthy love doesn't require erasing yourself to please others. The painful lesson I learned through Margaret's cruelty has become a gift I can give my daughter: the freedom to be authentically herself, to recognize toxic behavior, and to value people who bring genuine love into her life. Sitting in my garden today watching Sophia and Max chase butterflies while Daniel prepares lunch, I feel profound gratitude for this unexpected life. It bears no resemblance to what I once thought I wanted, yet it contains more authentic joy than I ever experienced in the Anderson mansion. "Mama, look!" Sophia calls, her chubby hands cupping a dandelion gone to seed. "I'm gonna make a wish." She closes her eyes, her face scrunched in concentration, then blows with all her might, sending the white seeds scattering on the breeze. "What did you wish for, sweetheart?" I ask. She grins, revealing the gap where her first baby tooth recently fell out. "Can't tell or it won't come true, but it's a good one." Looking at her bright, confident face, I make my own silent wish: that she grows up knowing her true value, recognizing authentic love, and choosing her own path without fear. That the family we've created, imperfect but genuine, gives her roots strong enough to weather life's inevitable storms. Sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as our worst moments. Margaret's cruelty, intended to destroy me instead, forced me to discover a strength and resilience I never knew I possessed. In trying to cast me out, she unknowingly set me free. Have you ever had someone's attempt to hurt you backfire and ultimately lead to something better in your life? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that. Sometimes what feels like the end is really just the beginning of something beautiful. Thank you for listening, and remember, the family we choose is often more powerful than the family we're born into.